The sky hasn't been a clean color in years. Once it carried shades of blue and white, lazy clouds drifting like daydreams over skylines that reached higher than any bird could fly. Now it hangs heavy, a bruised ceiling of ash and dim orange, glow, as if the horizon itself is always on fire. When the wind shifts, it brings with it the bitter tang of soot and the faint metallic sting of burned-out cities. Nothing smells fresh anymore, only smoke, dust, and the slow rot of a world that no longer knows how to heal. The land is worse. What used to be rivers are now lines carved deep into the earth, empty veins where water once pulsed and carried life. Bridges hang over them like broken ribs, connecting nothing to nothing. Grass hasn't grown in the lowlands for seasons. The soil, cracked and brittle, flakes away under the weight of a single footstep, revealing layers of earth that were never meant to breathe open air. Once green forests stand like skeletal ruins, trunks stripped of bark, limbs bare and reaching, as though the trees themselves had raised their hands in surrender before finally burning to cinders. Towns lie hollowed out, facades intact but lifeless. Their windows gape like missing teeth, the glass shattered long ago by storms or looters. Supermarkets that once pulsed with fluorescent light and endless rows of choices are gutted shells now, picked clean of everything that could sustain a body. The only things left are plastic wrappers that crumble to dust at the touch, and faded murals on walls that once tried to make neighborhoods feel like communities. Civilization has been reduced to echoes and outlines, fading faster each year. The cities. Well, the cities were always the loudest to fall. Towers of glass and steel snapped under the weight of endless quakes and storms. Now they lean against each other like drunkards, facades dangling, stairwells open to the elements. Rats still dart through the hollow spaces, though even they seem fewer, their numbers thinned by scarcity and the strange silences that follow. Some nights you can still hear car alarms in the distance, ghost sounds triggered by nothing but the shifting of a building settling into its own grave. As for the government, if you can call what's left of it a government, its voice has been nothing but static for months. There were broadcasts once, official reports, stern promises of order and relief. They faded like everything else, replaced by the scattered crackle of survivor stations and the occasional desperate voice too, faint to track. If there are leaders, they lead only themselves now. Some survivor groups have risen, calling themselves communities or enclaves. They wave banners stitched out of tarp and bedsheets, claiming territory in the ruins of malls, schools, or abandoned military outposts. But with community comes power. And with power comes the same old games: control through fear, trade at the price of loyalty. Then there are the scavengers. You can find them on the roads, picking through wreckage, searching for anything that can keep the hunger at bay another day. They're not a faction, not a people, just the shadow of desperation that lingers over every ruined stretch of highway. Sometimes they're harmless, too broken to pose a threat. Other times, they're more dangerous than any storm, willing to carve a man open for a single can of beans. Out here, hunger shapes morality, and the birds, though they came later, have made even silence into a weapon. They sit where the trees once stood, where the wires still hang, motionless and watching. You don't hear them the way you used to. No chirping at dawn, no restless flutter in the dusk. They simply perch, black, outlines against a bleeding sky. Some say they're just birds, mutated, driven from their habitats by the collapse of seasons. Others whisper they aren't birds at all, but something worse, something that learned how to wear feathers like a mask. Whatever they are, they don't sing. They watch. And in a world already buried in ash, their silence is louder than any scream. Uncertainty is constant here. Each morning feels like a coin flip between life and death, between another day of grinding survival or the final collapse of a fragile body. The storms don't warn you before they come anymore. They just appear, black walls that erase the horizon, rolling with winds that strip roofs from houses like scabs torn from skin. Fires don't burn out when the rain never comes. Heat doesn't retreat when the nights are as warm as afternoons. The balance of things is gone, and the world knows it. Some still try to hold on to ritual, clinging to what was once called normal. A man sets a table every evening in a collapsed diner, though he eats nothing. A woman lights candles in an old church, though the roof has been gone for years, and the rain extinguishes them within minutes. They do it anyway. Maybe because pretending, for a while, feels like survival too. Me, I keep the radio alive. It's all I've got left that feels like connection, even if it's just static most nights. I pedal the generator, I check the dials, I speak into the void. Maybe someone hears me, maybe no one does. But in a world that has lost its colors, its leaders, its rivers, and its songs, I think it matters that someone still speaks. And as I look out at the ruins of this place, the dead trees, the broken highways, the husks of towns swallowed by dust, I can't help but feel that the world is holding its breath. Waiting. For what? I don't know. But the silence, it's too heavy to last forever. I keep my name to myself on air. Names are anchors, things people cling to, and anchors sink boats. When I speak into this microphone, I am a voice and nothing more. People can build whatever they need out of that voice. A friend, a warning, a prayer. It's safer that way. Safer for them, maybe safer for me. Before this, I had a house with a porch that caught the late light. A woman who laughed like a radio station warming up. A kid who left handprints on every doorframe. I had a job I hated sometimes, and holidays that smelled of cinnamon. Those are the easy things to list when you're trying to prove you were once ordinary. The hard things are the quiet ones, the small, steady mistakes that grew into ruin. I remember the day the first river ran low like a clock losing minutes. I remember the way my wife stood in the doorway and didn't want to leave. The way the kid asked why the stars were different. I remember choosing stay and wait, or leave, and risk the road. I chose the road because leaving felt like an action, and staying felt like surrender. Now my companions are the radio, the pedal generator, and a crate of tools that have been given more lives than any patient animal ever had. When the silence gets too heavy, I talk. I read names off a scrap of paper sometimes. Names people have asked me to keep alive on the air. I don't know if anyone listens, whether those names travel farther than the next hill. But saying them feels like feeding something. And in a world where hunger is not just a word, but a toothache you carry in your chest, feeding is an act of faith. Survival here is part tradecraft and part stubborn habit. I sleep in shifts, short, shallow naps with the radio on standby and a shotgun within reach. I wake to the smallest shifts of air because storms now come fast and furious. You never know when a wall of dust will roll in and take your luck with it. Water is the religion of this place. I have a steel drum I used to use for rain collection, rigged with a tarp funnel and a charcoal filter beneath. The charcoal I make from burned pallets. The sand I sift from the dry riverbed, baked in the sun until every grain is confident in its dryness. A bit of bleach, a boil, and the water is sober enough to keep someone alive. There are tricks. Dew. Traps made from plastic sheeting. Squeezing moisture from cactus when we pass the scrubland. Bartering for bottles of saline with folks who hoard them like treasure. I keep a ledger of where water hides and who traded what the last time someone came through. You learn to read the world like a scavenger reads a map. The tilt of a gutter points to a cache. The color of a sky says whether the storms lean east or west. Food is barter and memory. There are root cellars under some buildings, their doors swollen with mold and the smell of old sleep. I raid them sometimes, slipping in at dawn like a thief of a gentler era, taking only what I can carry and leaving a mark on the wall so others know I was there. I smoke what I can preserve, fish when we find it in the hollow pools, or jerky from game that's half the size of a memory. Salt is more valuable than currency. A pinch can be counted like coins. I grow a patch of stubborn beans under a stretched panel of glass, a little greenhouse that captures the heat of the day and keeps the nights from killing the seedlings. It's small, foolish maybe, but watching a sprout stubborn its way through, the dirt gives me a reason not to fold. Shelter is negotiation. I've learned the art of sleeping in places that don't encourage long stays. Schools abandoned mid-term, a factory with a roof that still keeps the rain at bay, an old radio tower base where the wind sounds like turned pages. I fortify doors with rebar and pizza oven bricks scavenged from collapsed pizzerias. I know which neighborhoods are quiet because they are empty, and which are quiet because they are watched. You pick your solitude carefully. People are the hardest problem. Loneliness curls at the edges of every victory. There are times I meet someone at a crossroads, and for a moment I don't judge them for what they've done to survive. A cracked face from sun, hands with scars that read like foreign alphabets. I find myself trusting them because I want to trust them, because my muscles have grown soft from lack of needing to defend against the world. Then the trade goes wrong. The sugar swapped for lies, a bottle of water traded for a broken promise, and the need to survive contracts into a need to be guarded. You learn to watch hands, not smiles. You learn to ask questions that matter. Who's left? Where does your food come from? Do you have children? Answers that are lies are often the last thing you need. Sometimes people stay. There are enclaves, small, terrible, beautiful things that call themselves communities. They hang, laundry-like flags, mark boundaries with old tires and sprinklers, and grow timid rituals like candlelight dinners, even when the candles are hand-scraped from wax that smells like old holidays. Some are kind, some are cruel. Some claim to be democracies. Others are run by men who found a uniform and a voice and decided to keep both. I've had neighbors who shared soup and neighbors who stole the knife off my kitchen counter while I slept. In every enclave there is a price you pay, either with labor or with a secret you are forced to keep. I have no illusions about utopia. I have only pockets of peace. My hands remember how to fix things. I can splice a wire in the dark, coax a battery to hum when it thinks it is done, and tune a ragged antenna until the static becomes a chorus of possibilities. The radio is my salvation and my addiction. I've learned frequencies that people use for barter. I know the rhythm of the airwaves in a way that feels intimate, like listening to a friend breathe. There are nights when the generator coughs and the battery dies, and all that remains is the memory of sound. How the world used to be loud in a way that meant we were connected. When the generator is running, I can be a lighthouse. I send coordinates, news, jokes, warnings, names. I make up songs sometimes, ridiculous little things to make the static less lonely. Guilt is a constant companion. There are faces I carry like stones in my shirt. A boy who slipped beneath a sand drape when I could have thrown my hand. My wife's hands, cool and limp beneath a tarp the day the fever moved through our area faster than the help could arrive. There are choices that look differently in the dark. I once traded a week's worth of water for a bag of batteries because the radio needed them and a voice needed to be heard. Whether that decision saved more lives than it cost, I'll never know. I live with those calculations like an accountant with a ledger that never balances. Sometimes I speak their names on the air, not because I expect them to hear, but because saying them scatters a little of the weight. Hope is a stubborn thing, not the kind you see in films, grand and cured with a speech, but the petty practical hope that keeps you mending a torn boot, that convinces you to plant one more seed even though the night might take it. My hope comes from small signals, a message bleeped through a distant survivor station, the sight of smoke on the horizon that might mean another person has lived to make a fire, the sound of a child laughing when we ran into a pocket of community one afternoon. Those small things stack up like stones. Sometimes they form a wall, sometimes a cairn, sometimes they crumble under the wind. But they are the architecture of tomorrow if there is a tomorrow. There are rituals I keep now. At dusk, I walk the perimeter and listen to the birds, silent and watchful more often than not. And I say a short thing aloud to the night. It's not prayer exactly, more like a transaction. If you give me another sunrise, I'll keep the radio on. If you give me another day, I'll share water with the woman at the corner market. If you give me one more voice to hear, I'll not let silence win. It sounds ludicrous when I say it like this, but in the unfunny hours, ritual keeps the soul from eroding. I don't know how long I'll keep doing this. The generator is old. The parts are scavenged and grateful for care. My hair is more silver than it used to be, and the knees creak in a way that suggests fewer long journeys ahead. But every morning I wake, pedal the generator until the radio hums, and put a voice into the static. Maybe a child hears a story and smiles. Maybe an old man hears a name and cries. Maybe someone uses my frequency to call out a warning. Maybe nobody hears me at all. If the world ends tomorrow, at least it will have known I tried to keep a line open. If it doesn't, then perhaps my voice will have helped someone find their way. Either way, I keep talking. The silence the birds bring is loud, but I have learned to speak louder. The world may have taken everything from me, but it has not taken the need to speak, to mark a presence, to say, I am here. They came first as weather, and then they became everything else. For years, the warnings were half believed. Models that were explained in rooms with too much air conditioning and too much coffee. Graphs projected on walls that meant nothing until the walls themselves started to buckle. Then the maps stopped being diagrams and started being maps of our lives. Once green counties now labeled watch, critical, lost. I don't talk about charts on air. People don't want numbers when they're thirsty. Still, the numbers became a language I learned in the quiet hours, the way a survivor learns to read the direction of a wind. The drought arrived like a slow theft. Rivers that used to argue their way past towns slowed to whispers. Reservoirs dropped like tired breaths. Springs that had been reliable for generations pooled into murky mirrors and then disappeared. We rationed, we prayed, we rationed again. At first it felt like scarcity, like an inconvenient shortage that could be solved with patience. Then the seasons stopped keeping their promises. Winters were warmer. Springs arrived with nothing but anemic rain that evaporated before it touched the soil. Summers stretched their hands until October became July. The ground learned how to crack itself open and hold nothing. When the heat came, it came like a wall that kept moving forward. Heat domes sat over regions for weeks, trapping whatever air remained in place until the land gave up. Crops wilted in the fields and then combusted. Cereal crops that used to bend in the wind now snapped like dry reeds. Fires sparked out of nowhere and then ran like a rumor, unstoppable. We grew used to the smell of burned wood layered over the steady dust. Nighttime no longer cooled us. The dark hours were warm and heavy, and the insects that once hummed the night to sleep were fewer, too few to be comforting. From the sky came storms that did not remember their old gentleness. When rain did arrive, it came in anger. Walls of water that carved gullies where roads had been, carrying away what remained of fences, lawns, memories. The water that came was often toxic. Runoff from burned industrial lots. Chemicals leached from collapsed storage. Ash-laced torrents that tasted of metal even after the boils and filters. You could not drink every rain, and you could not trust the ground it fell on. Then the silent birds arrived, and whatever balance we had left tilted. They were not like flocks in a flock's way, no murmurations, no clouds of wings. They came as black punctuation, savage, motionless silhouettes dotting fences and power lines, lining the ridgelines like spectators to a play they had no business watching. People joked at first, as people do when faced with the grotesque. We tried to explain them away as mutation, a consequence of habitat loss and the scramble for food. But they were too many, and they were too quiet. They didn't scavenge so much as inspect. They watched. They made the sky feel like a ceiling pressing down on our throats. Encounters with other survivors are how the crisis becomes personal. I remember the caravan in early spring. 3 trucks and a motorcycle leaving before the heat got hold of the day. We traded some batteries and a crate of canned peaches for a small jerry can of water, the kind of trade that used to be shameful and is now just math. Halfway through a pass, we met another ragged party pushing in from the east. At first, their faces were relief, and the trade was friendly, but the road takes its toll on kindness. One of them had a child with fevered eyes and a cough that rattled, like wind through empty pipes. The party we'd just bartered with listened, then turned their backs and sped on. Later we found the tracks. Tires scoured the dirt in patterns that said they'd driven hard, driven far, and left no help behind. You learn quick. Help is a currency, but not everyone accepts it. There are enclaves that try to be something more, organized, with rules, and watchmen, and someone who distributes rations like a priest counting prayers. I have been to two that called themselves communities. One traded warmth for obedience. You gave labor and your name, and in exchange you got a cot and a ration of stew. The other fell apart under the weight of its own ideals. Leaders who promised fairness devolved into gatekeepers with lists of enemies, and a way of deciding whose faces deserved bread. The worst fights here are never over ideology. They're over water, over a shade tree that still manages to hold leaves, over a patch of ground that will grow one more plant if tended. Why is survival harder each day? Because the slow things added up, and then the fast things came. The ecology that used to stabilize storms, wetlands, forests, snowpacks, had been eroded by decades of neglect and warming. Without snow, the rivers began their long, slow death earlier in the year. Without trees, wind picked up dust and made it travel farther. The oceans warmed and pushed moisture around in patterns no one could predict. Storms that once made sense now turned into monsters that traveled inland like ships out of place. Every collapse fed another. Fires made the soil less able to hold water. Dead soil made floods more destructive. Floods poisoned the few remaining aquifers. We were not just losing resources, we were losing the systems that produced them. Fuel ran out in stages. Early on, the cars and trucks that could still move became lifelines, but each mile chewed through diesel that could not be replaced. Generators hummed like measure-giving metronomes. Their fuel was a coin you spent once and never got back. Solar helped those who had it, but panels scarred by ash and sand and the grit of storms lost efficiency. Batteries are precious. I cannibalize what I can. Cell phone batteries reassembled into lanterns. Deep cycle batteries patched and coaxed with careful charging. The ledger of my power is a moral list. Which nights did I stay on air longer? And whose face did that keep from panicking? The social fabric frayed. Hospitals fell into triage systems run by those who could stay and those who could not. Pharmacies were looted early. Insulin, antibiotics, saline, gone in a matter of weeks. Disease, once kept at bay by modern systems, now sneaks through gaps. A fever can take a body before you can get them to a clinic 2 towns away. Mental health is a casualty. People stop dreaming because sleep now must be a calculation. When do you rest? And when do you listen for raiders? Who do you trust enough to give your last can of food to? I try to explain some of the mechanics on air when the moment feels right, because knowledge is a small weapon that can be sharper than a knife. The atmosphere that holds heat is a thin blanket. When you add more greenhouse gases, it thickens and traps more of the sun's energy. The jet stream, the great ribbon of wind that used to carry weather from place to place, has started to wobble in ways that lock weather in place. That's why a storm can sit over a city for days and then move on, leaving everything drowned. Fires release carbon that feeds more warming. Permafrost, if you live near the north, was once a cold sink that kept methane quiet. Now it breathes out old gases that accelerate the very thing that melted it. It's feedback loops stacked on top of feedback loops. It's not a single villain you can point to. It's an accumulation of small decisions that look catastrophic. When combined, actionable things matter when someone is listening with hands that are used to surviving. Here is the practical voice I use between stories and names. And when the generator is steady, if you can, collect and store water now. Line a barrel with food-grade plastic, keep it covered, and use a first-in, first-out system so water doesn't sit and stagnate. Make charcoal filters by burning hardwood down to embers. Crush it, and layer it with sand and gravel in a container to remove taste and particulate matter. Then boil what you filter for a full minute, or add a trusted amount of bleach per litre if you have it. If you must drink from a source you suspect is contaminated, tie a piece of cloth over the mouth first and then filter. It will not solve chemical contamination, but it will remove debris. For storms, reinforce your shelter by bracing doors with crossbars and keeping windows covered with plywood. If you have to be out in the open, keep low and avoid ridgelines. Wind-driven debris will hit whatever sticks out first. When the birds cluster on a line or a wire, don't stand under them. It sounds simple, but we once lost a neighbour to a panic that led them into the path of an approaching skirmish. For raiders, maintain a signal protocol. One pattern to say, friend, another to say, danger. Agree on it with neighbours if you have them. If you're moving through an area, travel light and quiet. Avoid making barter obvious. If you must approach a settlement, send one person ahead with a white cloth tied to a stick and speak through gaps. Small kindnesses go farther than weapons at first contact. I taught a handful of people how to make dew traps the hard way. Rig up a sheet of plastic stretched over a low frame, funneling into a bottle. It will not feed a family, but it will take a throat back from the edge. Learn which plants store moisture, cactus, some succulents, and how to extract it without poisoning yourself. Salt is survival. Preserve food with salt and smoke. Smoke. Meat low and slow. It will keep longer and is less likely to make someone sick when you have nothing but rancid options otherwise. Our resources are limited in ways that hurt in the dark. Water is the obvious thing. Food comes second, and then fuel. Medicine is a wild card. We barter for antibiotics like they are gold. My radio batteries are a sin and a salvation. Sometimes, I will trade a week's worth of water for the lifespan of a battery because my voice might steer a caravan away from a dying bridge, or it might warn a child away from a contaminated spring. Those choices make a ledger that never balances. There are nights when I hear the crack of a gun on the road, and I feel the ledger in my ribs. Did I save the right person by speaking that night? The crisis is no longer a thing that happens out there. It moves into our campsites and our gardens. It takes the shape of a neighbor who becomes a watchman and then a tyrant. It becomes the choice to keep a light on all night to comfort a child, even though the light might draw the wrong kind of attention. It becomes the storms that arrive with no memory of mercy and the birds that sit like watchmen on a dead horizon and make you feel observed by a world that has stopped being innocent. There is urgency in every breath now. The immediate tasks are to keep water clean, keep the radio alive, know your neighbors, and teach someone how to fix a wire if you die in the night. The broader problem, the tipping of systems, requires more than any of us can do alone. It needs a rebuilding of trust, of networks, of the kind of patience societies once had with infrastructure and one another. It needs work that looks impossible when the next meal sits like a ledge you're not sure you can reach. So we keep moving in increments. We close our eyes and trade a memory for a plan. We tell stories on the radio and in the rubble because stories are scaffolding. They hold us until we can build something more permanent. When the birds look down and the storms blow sideways, when the reservoirs are nothing but a tale told by a water-stained radio broadcast, I keep my hand on the microphone and my eyes on the road. There are moments when fear is a clean animal, sharp, useful, and moments when it is the thing that makes you hoard salt instead of sharing it. I try not to be greedy with help. I try not to be reckless with trust. The crisis is not a single event. It is a compound sentence of disasters that demands we learn new grammar. And while the grammar is still being written, while the birds still perch and the skies still bruise, I broadcast what I can. Warnings, barter calls, names, and the small science that keeps someone alive long enough to listen to the next sentence. ChatGPT said, "They say that pressure is something you can measure on a barometer, not on a person. They are wrong. Pressure here isn't a mercury column. It's the way your shoulders sit closer to your ears, the way a single cough in the next room makes your chest tighten like a fist. It gathers in small things and then becomes the weather. In the months after the birds arrived and the rivers receded to memory, Pressure started to take up the space where plan used to be. The generator sounded different in the spring. It coughed when I first started it, and then learned to wheeze along like a stubborn animal. Batteries that held a charge for a week in the past now begged for mercy after 2 nights of heavy use. The radio's glass face was scratched, the dials sticky with hands that once tuned in with more patience than they had now. Each broken thing was a tally in my head. There's an economy of failure out here. How long can one patched wire keep you connected? How many times can you jury-rig a fender before the car becomes a pile of useful metal instead of a vehicle? Water ran low enough that the math started to feel like an accusation. My barrel was at half in a way it never had been before. The beans in the patch were leafless from a late frost that shouldn't have come. And the jerky supply was a confidence trick that would not last another winter. Food, fuel, and batteries. Each one a column holding up a roof made of shared hope. When one column starts to wobble, the whole house becomes an argument with gravity. Then the raids began to refine themselves. Early on they were opportunistic, desperate, people taking what they needed and leaving signs of shame. Now some groups had learned to coordinate. The first time I met a group with uniforms and a strict pattern of movement, I thought it was an enclave. I learned later they were a raiding crew with a leader who'd cobbled together a sense of order out of other people's fear. They called themselves the Quiet Hand, and they moved like predators. Soft voices, harder decisions. They didn't rush the camps. They asked questions, counted heads, and when someone lied, they made examples. We learned to prepare. We dug escape routes, narrow grooves under the porch that led to the hedgerow, a crawl space behind a ruined refrigerator that could hide 2 people and a dog. We built noise traps, tin cans on twine that clattered, and told a watcher a minute too late that someone was moving across the yard. You don't fight a well-armed raider gang with bravery. You fight them with rules and tricks and the stubbornness to be quiet when you need to be loud in your mind. We practiced codes. 2 knocks meant safety. 3 knocks meant don't open. I added a signal on my frequency. 3 soft beeps played at dusk to warn other listeners that a roving party had been seen on the West Road. It was small, theatre, but theatre saves lives out here. Rumours travel like contraband. They move faster than the truth and are more valuable. For months there were whispers about a place called the Verdant, about a spring that refused to stop, a pocket of earth that still ran cool and green despite everything else burning. The Verdant was a story people used to sleep. Mothers hummed it to children who had never seen rain. The map of the Verdant was drawn on 1,000,000 tongues. North, northwest, across a valley, 5 days by foot if you don't stop. Each version had different landmarks, a collapsed church, a rusted silo, a coyote that sat like a statue. I put the rumors on the air once, not because I believed them, but because something in me wanted to see the map made honest. If enough, people were looking. Maybe the truth would out itself. Not everything that claims life is life. There was the story of a desalination plant somewhere near the coast, a research facility that had been left running on solar and a stubborn director who refused to die. It sounded like a myth meant for people with better shoes than most of us had. But myths have use. They give people reason to walk. They give hope a direction. Meeting other survivors is a negotiation of scales. You meet one person and you imagine community. You meet a caravan and you imagine a society. You meet a band of predators and you imagine your own funeral. I had a patch of luck once, and it looked like this. Toward dusk, smoke on a line of horizon like a question. I pedaled my generator down to the ridge and called out on the frequency I used for barter. A voice answered, small and uncertain but not hostile. They were 3 people. A woman named Ray, an old man with a limp who only said his name when I asked, and a teenage boy who had learned to keep his mouth closed until people proved themselves useful. We traded. I gave them a can of peaches. They gave me a coil of wire and news. They'd come from a place 2 days east where someone claimed to have dug a well that had water clear enough to drink. It was a rumor cast like a line. Maybe bait, maybe truth. They left before morning. A week later, Their tracks were cut off by tire marks that went sideways. I found boot prints leading back to the ridge, and a smear of blood that had dried to the color of old coffee. The boy's jacket was folded neatly and left beneath a rock. No one will ever mistake the choice to leave someone behind for kindness. Trust is a lever you use with care. I have kept myself in the middle distance for too long, close enough to lend a battery when the voice on the line sounded like my neighbor, far enough away to not be forced into a council meeting where the price of soup is your last name. I worry sometimes that my voice, the one I give willingly to the radio, is a betrayal. If I meet someone who begs for the map to the Verdant and I say where to go, do I send them into a trap so I can keep my generator? If I stay and keep broadcasting warnings, do I become the lighthouse that guides raiders as surely as it guides farmers? Those are the mathematics that refuse to solve themselves. The birds change the psychology of travel. People now judge a line of black birds on the wire as either they've eaten or they're waiting. We got used to the way they made places feel watched. We learned, too late sometimes, that raids coordinate with bird perches. A convoy would wait at the foot of a hill, and the raiders would watch for birds to lean a certain way, then move. They used the birds as clocks. The thought of it makes my skin tighten. The birds became, in some places, part of the intelligence architecture of the bad men. It meant that a sky full of perches is almost as dangerous as a road with fresh tracks. People begin to tell you their life stories when they think they have nothing else to trade. I have sat under a tarp with folks who told me about houses they once had that had chimneys, about TVs that played moving pictures and not just static, about sports that meant towns would stop for entire afternoons. Their stories anchor what the world used to be, but they also bury it. Memory can be a chain used to bind you to a past that no longer serves. There are nights I listen and think that if I can keep those voices aired long enough, some part of the past will start to stitch itself into the present. But memory isn't a map, and never was. It is a compass that points to what hurt the most. The internal argument grows louder when the world becomes a set of literal choices. There was a week when my neighbor, an old woman named Margot, who had kept a small garden of potatoes, came to me faltering and asked if I could spare a ration of water. She said she had been keeping the seeds alive for a child she hoped might find them. I could see how she measured the days in the plants she tended. Helping her felt essential in a way that made leaving the radio feel like abandoning an altar. I gave her water. 2 nights later, a man with a gun came through and took the potatoes anyway, saying they were a tax for passage. Margot cried quietly into the ashes of a candle and asked if I could fix her fence. I fixed it. The ledger of my kindness is a list with many unpaid debts. Around this time, a new signal started to appear on the edge of the band I used. A tone beneath the static, a pattern not quite human. It was like stumbling on a language you almost remember. At first it was a curiosity, then it repeated the same cadence at night. I recorded it and played it back over the air, trying to triangulate it with the sparse instruments I had. Old maps have value. Old radios less. I thought maybe it was the Verdant calling. Maybe it was a distress beacon. Maybe it was someone with the same idea as me, to leave a breadcrumb for those who might find them. The decision to follow a rumor is more than logistics. It is a philosophy. Do you believe in movement, or do you believe in roots? Stay and build, or leave and search. I had nights where I took apart the generator and held the parts like tiny promises. If I left, who would keep the frequency? Who would read the names off the scrap of paper? I thought of the boy whose jacket was found on the ridge. I thought of Margot's potatoes. I thought about the ledger, and it began to look like a petition for cowardice. The radio felt less like a life-sustaining device, and more like a conscience that needed its own shelter. As the heat climbed, and fuel evaporated from the pumps, and the birds thickened on the wires, the neighborhood changed shape. People who had been friendly became economical with contact. A man I used to barter with stopped coming around. His sister fell ill, and the family stayed inside, refusing to share what little they had. Another neighbour put up boards with new nails in the pattern of a warning. Someone painted red circle on a lamppost and called themselves a watch. They were earnest and small and terrifying all at once. The social order became a stack of temporary solutions held together with string. The rumour, verdant spring, desal plant, beacon, coalesced into a decision point when Ray came back, alone. Her voice on the air had been a bright thing the last time I heard it. A quick laugh that reminded me there were still people who used humour to trade in the small world. She showed up at dawn, dusty and hollow-eyed, and sat down on the steps, with a water bottle that had been drained to a sliver. She said the well had been real, but it had been guarded by men who believed in controlling hope. She said the desal plant had been a rumour and turned out to be a skeleton, its membranes, clogged by ash. She had a small scrap of paper with a coordinate, and the name of a place she'd not seen. The Pillars. She told me there was a caravan going north. About 60 people, armed but not cruel, who intended to look for the verdant, because sometimes myth hides truth. They planned to leave in 3 days. She wanted me to come. She said if I came, I could bring the radio and broadcast on the move, and maybe they could protect the people who listened. Her hand was small around the paper. I looked at the radio, then at the generator, then at the list of names. I imagined the frequency going silent in the night because someone had cut the generator. I imagined a child hearing nothing and being more scared than before. I imagined the caravan finding a green place, and me having been the one to help them find it. We argued like lovers and like accountants. I argued that the frequency mattered, that my voice pulled people in and kept them from making bad choices in the night. She argued survival is a verb. She told me that roots don't matter when the roof leaks. In the end, we did what people always do. We hedged. I agreed to go as an emissary, to bring the radio on a battery she swore was good for the trip, and to teach 2 others how to run the station if something happened to me. We drew a map on a napkin and crossed off places that held predators. We filled up canteens and wrapped jerky in oiled paper. I left the generator under a tarp with my name scratched into the wood. I left a note on the table that said, "Keep the frequency. If I do not return in 3 weeks, make noise." It felt like a covenant. Leaving is a funny thing. The world watches when you go. The birds watched the ridge as we packed. A child in the caravan asked me if I was scared. I lied gently and said I was mostly nervous. The truth was a coil of many fears. The fear of losing my home, the fear of abandoning the air to silence, the fear that the verdant was a mirage and I would be dust in someone else's map. I pedaled the generator one last time until the battery hummed to life, and then we put it in a crate and strapped it to the back of an old pickup. The road ahead was more than geography. It was a decision about which kind of fear we would choose, the fear of staying or the fear of leaving. Both are heavy. Both slow you down. As the caravan crested the ridge and the town unrolled behind us like a map of old grief, I turned the radio dial and spoke into the static one last time before we moved out. "If anyone hears this, crowd the band at 5. We're taking a road north. If the birds learn to count, let them hear our feet first." It was a poor joke. It was a promise. The tension was not just outside the truck. It sat in my throat like a stone that tasted of all the choices I'd already made. The next weeks would teach me things I thought I knew and things I could not have guessed. The road, I learned, is a long way to measure a person. The caravan would be patient, greedy, and generous in turn. The birds would pick a hill to watch and a night to test. The verdant might be a place or a lesson, but whatever it was, I had decided to move toward it. And movement is how hope sometimes becomes trouble and sometimes becomes salvation. The ledger of the radio would be carried on someone else's shoulders now, and that knowledge felt like both a relief and a danger. They said the verdant would be a miracle. They also said miracles came wrapped in teeth. We crested the last low hill at dawn, and for a moment the world betrayed me into believing the rumors. There, tucked between 2 blackened ridges, a strip of green lay like a secret folded into a map. Not great, no Emerald Valley out of legend, but real. A ribbon of sedge, a handful of trees that still held leaves, and a small pool whose surface swallowed the dull color of the sky and gave back something like hope. The birds watched us from the wires above, a stiff ribbon of silhouettes. They sat like punctuation marks, every head turned into the same sentence. Watch. The caravan slowed to a cautious crawl. People climbed down and walked on feet made unsure by too many empty miles. Ray was the first to wade to the water, and when she cupped the pool in her hands and lifted it to her mouth, there was a sound I did not expect, an animal sob that could have been laughter if the world still held that shape. We all drank, though water tasted of stone and something cold and clean that made my chest unclench for the first time in months. Then the sky changed with a speed that was criminal. A hot wall of air arrived from the west, and the birds unpeeled from the wires as if someone had given an order. Their wings were a thunder that felt out of place. Birds should be soft disruptions, not the drums of something marching. On the Ao ridge behind us, I could see new tracks, heavy tires cut into the dirt, then the shadow of men moving like a curtain. They came with the quiet efficiency of people who had practiced hunger. The quiet hand had found a rhythm. Rumors said they used the birds as signals. Watch the birds for a tilt in their stance, and the raiders knew which valley was most likely to be left undefended. We had hoped the Verdant would be off their map. Hopes are always tidy until someone else reads the same paper. We had rules before the first shot. Keep low, move water quietly. If raiders come, do not make yourself worth the trouble. Those rules crumpled under the weight of what was happening now. The pump we'd been given, an old hand pump with a rusted collar and a stubborn diaphragm, would take a long time to move enough water for 60 people, for hours maybe. The generator would make it faster, drive an improvised motor, and give us buckets in minutes. But the generator's life ran on a battery that was as finite as a person's patience. The battery could keep the radio on for 2 good hours, or power the pump for enough time to fill the jugs and barrels we had. 2 needs. 1 small coin. I felt the ledger in my chest again. Water for all tonight, or the voice for the band tonight. 2 things I have always believed in, that water keeps bodies breathing, and that a voice keeps minds honest. Which ledger line pays which debt? They were already appearing on the crest, silhouettes with scarves over faces, rifles slung like promises. The quiet hand had chosen the valley. The birds had nodded. The air smelled of old metal and a man's impatience. I walked into the center of the caravan and unshouldered the radio. The generator coughed like a tired animal. On the table, my list of names looked smaller than it did 2 mornings earlier. Children with dry lips pressed palms to their mouths. The old man with the limp sat on a crate and did not look up. Ray's eyes were wide and bright like flint. There was no time for debate. Decisions in the end are not made with committees. They are made with the narrow instrument of what you can carry in your hands. I could have done what I'd done before. Kept the band open, sent a warning. Maybe lure help if any help existed within listening distance. I could have tuned the frequency and put out a call. A beacon that would have screamed our coordinates into the air. A lighthouse to the good and the predatory alike. I thought of the nights when my voice had pulled a scared neighbor back from a road, when a heedless caravan turned away, because someone had said, "Bridge down, don't cross." The radio is a tool that has saved people by making them less foolish, but it is also a flare that paints a bullseye on the map. If we signaled now, the quiet hand would have a shopping list. They would come faster and with more men. 2 hours of broadcast could mean 2 hours of planning for them. That is a ledger line I could not calculate cleanly. So I did the thing I had never practiced. The thing that made my hands shake with the memory of trades and barters and small betrayals. I took the battery out of the radio crate and, with a pair of scavenged connectors and a prayer, slid it into the pump motor. The generator would be quiet on the frequency. My voice would be a put-out candle. Ray grabbed my wrist. "You can't," she started, and her voice broke. "I can," I told her, "and I will." The sentence felt like a promise I had no right to make. Tell them to keep low. Make the kids sit. If they come, give them water and then run. She looked at me like she was trying to divest me of my choices and found nothing to collect. The caravan moved with the awkward grace of people doing what they must. A welted woman stilled her child with a cloth over the mouth. A man hauled barrels in silence. The pump coughed as the battery took, a hesitant whine, then the slow, blessed suction of water moving upward through a hose. We filled jugs like monks filling holy vessels. For the first half hour, we were a choreography of relief. Men passed buckets. Children watched wide-eyed as the barrels drank deep and then spilled over, an obscene abundance to eyes that had memorized scarcity. I watched the birds like a man watch his breath. The ridge had more movement now. The quiet hand was testing the valley's patience, sending scouts with long lenses to measure how many of us breathed. Then the first shot cracked. It was not meant to be accurate, just a punctuation. A thing to say, we have the right to be feared. The quiet hand's gabardine shadow unfurled into the valley. Men with faces wrapped like bandages slid into positions. They fired warning shots 3 at a time, measured and ceremonious. Their leader's voice carried like a blade across the dirt, polite and terrible. Water, quietly, then leave. The men at our edge obeyed the first instinct survival drills teach. Hands open, little offerings. We rolled out barrels where they could see them but not touch the inner stores. I could have handed the leader a jug and an envelope of shame, but then he would have known what we had under the top, and men like him keep learning things they can use. He stepped toward the pump. I could see the way his chest moved. Someone who had practiced confidence until it became a muscle. He lifted a gloved hand and just for a breath looked me in the face. I thought I recognized that look, the human thing that colors every raider, the man who took over a role because the world had offered one, and he had worn it like armor. "Turn that off," he said to me. His gun pointed like a polite finger. "Give us the battery. Walk away." My palms were grease and memory. If I handed him the battery, the pump would die, and so would the chance for the caravan to leave with water. If I refused, they might shoot the pump, burn the place, slaughter those who could not run. There was no equation that made everyone happy. I stepped forward. "You can take the barrels already filled," I said, "but you'll have to let the rest of us leave." He smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. "Leave?" Not helpful. We want the spring. He wanted more than a jug. He wanted control. Words unravel quickly in moments like that. I found myself thinking of the nights that had led me here. The choice to leave my house, the bargain with my conscience when I traded a week's water for batteries, the names I'd spoken on the radio so they wouldn't be ashes. All of those led to this small, sharp present. I should have known then that the quietest war is the one you fight for a moment. I should have known the birds were a clock. I did something reckless and, perhaps, necessary. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the small hand organ I'd kept since before any of this for no reason other than the way its bellows fit into my palm. I pressed a note, one note, and then, because I'm a storyteller and my hands like theatre, I pressed another. The sound is ridiculous in a valley where guns are speech, tin notes cutting through metallic air. But it was also, perhaps, the very last small human thing I could make besides a promise. As the leader's eyes narrowed at the sound, a row of men on the ridge shifted. Perhaps they were curious, perhaps weary. The note was my distraction, a tiny, fragile thing thrown into a slab of stone. It bought us seconds. The pump sluiced. Ray shouted the code we'd rehearsed. 2 short knocks on the metal drum, then 1 long. People ducked. The kids were scooped up into arms and pushed into the hedgerow. The caravan began to move. Not running in a mad scatter, but walking fast and low, barrels balanced like condolences. The leader barked orders. Men moved to cut off the low path. A gun cracked in the brush. A young man, one of the caravan's more reckless souls, stumbled. I heard the sound of his body hitting the packed earth and the wet, triumphant sound of a boot nearby. The leader laughed, a clean, human sound that tasted like vinegar. He had been made cruel by the shape of the world. I should have run. I should have left the pump and the battery and everything I'd been clinging to. Instead, I stayed. I kept the pump running. I kept the hose aimed. Water is a stubborn truth. It will not be lost to a man's swagger if someone gives it the gravity of care. A bullet grazed my shoulder. The world exploded into hot light, and then the slow cool of pain. The leader's voice came soft and close, telling the man to finish, the boy. I moved like a man who has counted the cost and decided to pay it. I lunged into the path of the boot, grabbing at a hand that was going to do harm. We tussled in the dust. It was small, filthy, and perfectly ordinary. Hands on a body, struggle for leverage, the smell of sweat and diesel. I felt the quiet rush of something like clarity. The ledger closes when you close it yourself. Somebody screamed. A boy shouted a name. I heard a body fall, and then the chaos of running feet. The pump sputtered as a shot hit its collar. For a moment, the motor was a dying insect. The hum cut like a thread. Ray's voice was a sudden star over the noise. "Go! Now!" she screamed, and the caravan moved like a tide. They carried what they could. The barrels that mattered slid into racks. People ran toward the low path. Bodies bent to the road, breath burning like stolen coins. I stayed because someone had to stay, because a voice that had traded batteries before could now trade a shoulder for a life and call it even. I got two, men off a boy who'd been staring at the sky and the birds, like someone who had been chosen. I took 3 blows that left me thinking of my wife's hands, of a porch light that used to be something ordinary and predictable. One of the blows took the wind out of me in a way that felt like the closing of a chapter. We left the Verdant then in a fashion that was not triumphant. We left with water and with bodies that would need care. We left with the knowledge that the quiet hand had learned a new rhythm. They would be back, perhaps armed with more, perhaps with mercenaries hired through force. The birds would watch the next valley and tilt their heads. The generator and the radio sat on the table where I'd left them, a quiet, wounded pair. The battery, scorched and half empty, hummed like an old animal too broken to rise. My voice was a bruise in my throat. Later, on the road, I would tell myself that the choice had been simple. Water for now, voice for later. But in the heat and ache of that night, there was nothing simple. There was only the slow accrual of dues, names to be said, wounds to be bound, children to be kept from, being taught fear as a language. As the caravan moved away from the green ribbon, the birds unrolled into the sky like a warning, and the ridge took their silhouettes in. I sat under a tarp with my shoulder binding and listened to the silence where the radio used to hum. The generator was a sleeping thing now, pillowed with cloth. The frequency was dark. I had traded the band to feed throats. I had traded my voice for the sound of water. Whether that ledger was balanced, I could not tell. The weight in my chest was not guilt. It was responsibility. I had made a choice, and the world would now move on with the consequences. When night fell, the caravan camped in a low hollow, and the water we'd saved made fires less frantic. People laughed, small and brittle, like matches struck with too much force. Ray sat close to me and pressed a damp cloth to my shoulder. The radio sat between us like an accusation and a keepsake. "You could have called more," she said, softly. "And made the valley a billboard?" I answered. "We might have drawn more hands to our door than we could handle." She nodded. "Still," she said, "you gave us a choice. That matters. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. The night was a slow thing, and the birds were a patient jury." I closed my eyes for a moment and thought of my wife and the porch that used to catch light. I thought of the names on my scrap of paper and the faces that sometimes answered when I spoke. I thought of the ledger that will never balance until the world finds a different math. The Verdant was real enough to fill a jug and make a child sleep. We had it for a night. In the morning we would move north again, carrying water and the memory of the choice. The quiet hand would be learning from this valley like a man learns from a wound. The birds would still watch, and I, my voice quieter, my battery spent, would have to find a new way to keep telling people what to do. The turning point had been not the sight of green, nor the clash with men, nor the bruise of a bullet. It was the small moment I chose, water over broadcast, flesh over frequency, the humming life of a pool over the reach of my voice. That choice would change the ledger. Whether it would save us or doom us would only be measured in the days to come. The night after the verdant bled into the road. Silence felt like a pressed thing, thick and waiting. We made camp in a hollow where the wind missed us, and the stars seemed meaner for the way they watched without helping. The water we'd stolen back from the edge of God kept the fires modest and the mouths less hysteric. People ate until their hands trembled, then lay awake counting the warmth like a small inheritance. My shoulder throbbed under the cloth Ray had wrapped around it. The wound was not clean. Bullets and boots are never neat. The blood had stopped, mostly because there was nothing left in the field to pull it out, and the caravan's medic, an old nurse who had kept her temper and a few aspirin, muttered and stitched what she could. She said the bullet had nicked the muscle. She said I would be sore for a long time, and that I'd need to keep my arm from catching infection. I listened like someone hearing a weather report when the cyclone is already over, useful, distant, and immovable. In the morning, the caravan moved with a tired dignity. They had water. They had the heatless relief of having fed children. They had grief. The boy who'd stumbled on the ridge would not be walking with us. He had been one of those young men who think themselves too quick for the road, and now the road had corrected him with a boot and an old rifle. They buried him under a flat stone and a can of peaches, set like an offering. The funeral was a quiet thing. No hymns, no pastors, just the caravan making a hole in the earth, and a woman singing a half-remembered song so softly the birds on the wire might have mistaken it for wind. What I traded at the verdant sits in my chest like a calculation that will never balance. The radio, my small noisy lighthouse, sat under a tarp at the table where I had left it, a thing that knew its own silence. The generator, pillowed with cloth, still smelled faintly of oil. The battery that had powered the pump was scorched and half empty. It hummed like an animal used to being fed and now left to wait. The band was dark. For the first time in years, there was no voice to call out names into the static. I felt that absence sharply, like someone cutting a rope you had been leaning on. It is strange how the world rearranges its morals in the face of hunger. Some said I had done right. Others said I had been reckless. In the hollow, by the fire, each person's verdict was the size of their thirst. A woman with a child in her lap hugged me and whispered, "You saved my girl." Her eyes were dry and hard with gratitude. An old man across from us, he'd lost an arm to some rusted machine before the drought, narrowed his eyes and told me later he'd preferred a radio to keep the band open so their enclave could learn of safe routes. There was no easy reconciliation. I kept both judgments because both were true. I had saved throats and silenced a voice. In the days that followed, the story of the verdant moved ahead of us like a rumor that had learned to run. Word reaches places we will never see. An enclave on the other side of a dry basin, a small group that sleeps under a busted overpass. They heard the story and the details that mattered. Water, raiders, the quiet hands knew cruelty. Some cheered that we'd returned with barrels. Others were warned to hide their pumps. The quiet hand, cunning and efficient, had learned too. They would not leave the map blank and unstudied. The birds had noted our passage. I could not shake the feeling that somewhere men in scarves were sitting under wires and counting. Nature took no cue from our moral wrangling. The verdant, for all its brief glory, was bruised. The pump we'd used had pulled water from a small pool that looked less like a spring and more like a pocket fed by an ancient seep. Barrels left, half full, were overturned, where men had tussled. Children had stamped the sedge in their glee. Footprints scarred the moss. The water would come back slowly, if it came back at all. Life is not a flipbook you can return to the page you once liked. Some seeds will sprout next season. Other roots will never recover. Inside me, something had shifted in a quieter way than my wound. I had always been a voice first, a mechanic second. The broadcast was my covenant to the world. Names read, warnings given, a hand to the lost. Trading the radio felt like moving the foundation under a house to shore up a wall. It made me uneasy, in a way I had not predicted. I'd been keeping a ledger of small mercies and small betrayals for years, but the verdant had forced a different kind of accounting, one that had skin and breath, and sometimes a child's laugh. That shift changed what I did next. For a while, I let others carry the generator and the battery as cargo. I let Ray insist I rest. I learned to accept help in the small way an old man learns to accept a walking stick, grudging, practical. But idleness did not suit a person who has had a microphone for a long time. Skills calcify without use, and voices go stale. So I began to teach instead. We camped in a hollow long enough for knots to form between us. I taught 2 young people, one who had a steady hand and one who could read a tuner, to run the band. It felt like sacrament. I showed them how to check the valves on a generator, how to splice wires cleanly, how to listen for a failing capacitor before it burned out. I showed them the ledger, how to count water, how to ration, how to choose between the thing that keeps bodies alive and the thing that keeps minds steady. They asked questions I had no clean answers for, but teaching forced me to put the answers into a form that was useful and honest. It was a way of spreading responsibility rather than hoarding it. The caravan kept moving north, and we kept a slow watch for the quiet hand. They tested other valleys as if looking for a pattern. Each time they came to a place, the people there learned a new shape of caution. The birds, which had been a strange omen, were now part of the strategy of enemies. Men watched them like barometers and made choices based on the tilt of a crow's head. It felt obscene that avian silence had become military intelligence, but that is how the world rearranges itself. My wound healed slow. The nurse said scars tell stories, and mine would look like a map of a night someone chose water over a broadcast. The boy we'd buried remained a hollow in my dreams for a while, the face that peered at me as if I had been the one to decide. His fate. Guilt is a practical thing here. It organizes behavior. It told me to be better in small ways, to mark wells with discreet signs, to teach the code knocks to neighbors, to inscribe the generator's burial place with a note that said, "If I do not return, run the band." It told me to be honest when I had to send people toward a place that might be a lie. Hope, after the verdant, became less triumphant and more tactical. I learned to measure it in terms small enough to carry a child's steady breath through the night, the sprout of a bean in a tray of borrowed soil, a radio operator who could turn a dial and not panic. These were not grand salvations, but they were stitches, tiny repairs that, given enough of them, might become a seam. The environmental story did not pause for our human morality. Dust returned to the edges of the pool within days, stirred up by the traffic of trucks. The canopy of leaves would not snap back because a caravan had passed. It would need seasons and patience and the slow work of roots. Yet, even as the verdant showed bruises, it showed, dangerously and stubbornly, that life could persist. That ribbon of green was not an epic cure. It was a reminder that water and shade and patient soil do sometimes exist in pockets. Those pockets are worth protecting. People keep asking me if I regret my choice. The honest answer is that regret tastes like the things I cannot change. The boy, the lost radio nights, the generator humming under a tarp. But I have also seen a child fall asleep without the convulsed worry of thirst. I have watched a woman weep into her hands, and then, after a while, laugh at a private joke with someone across the fire. Those small recoveries are their own kind of ledger credit. The band remained dark for a long stretch. That silence taught me humility. Voices matter, and so do throats. For a while I had to accept that I would not be able to be both lighthouse and well. Now my work is to make sure someone else can be the lighthouse when I am needed to be the well. Training others is a way of stretching the purpose of the radio across more hands. It's a way to ensure that if I'm down, the names get said, the warnings go out, and the small science of surviving keeps circulating. On clear nights, I still think about that porch and my wife and the way afternoons used to fold into long, ordinary happiness. The grief is a weather pattern. It moves through. It leaves the air different. And then it returns. I have learned not to fight the return. I have learned to fold it into the work, letting memory be a map without trying to live in the place it points to. When the caravan left for a new ridge the week after Verdant, Ray came to me and took my hand. "You did what you could," she said, and I believed her because I wanted to. I believed her because we both knew that belief was an action. I tightened the bandage over my shoulder and watched the dust swallow them until they were a smear against the day. After they left, I walked back to the tarp and the quiet radio and laid my hand on the generator's metal flank. It was heavier than sleep. I did not know when I would fire it up again. I did not know if the quiet hand would one day come with enough men to break the machines and the bones of any place that tried to keep the green. I did know that for a while. For one night, the caravan had drunk deep and the children slept. That knowledge is a small, blunt thing. It will have to be enough until something larger arranges itself. A new network of wells, a plan to guard the verdant, an agreement among enclaves that holds water like a common. I do not know if we will find that. What I know is this: people still carry stories, and stories still teach people how to move through danger. I taught 2 people to tune a frequency. I taught a woman how to brace a door. I showed a boy how to make a dew trap from a plastic sheet. Those are small resistances to collapse, but they are resistances nonetheless. So I sit sometimes at dusk and call names into the dark, even when I have nothing new to say. It is not the same as broadcasting a map, but it keeps the rhythm of the voice alive. Maybe one day the band will hum again and shout coordinates to a safer sky. Maybe the verdant will be guarded by people who understand how fragile it is. Maybe the birds will pick another wire to watch. For now, I tend the wound on my shoulder, mend the generator's loose wire, and fold the radio blanket neatly each night. I measure hope in the slow, sensible things. A clean jug, a sewn seam, 2 young operators who will not freeze when the frequency stutters. Those are the small economies we can run without a central bank. They are the architecture of whatever comes next. And until the road ends or the radio sings again, I will keep the ledger open, because a ledger that tracks both water and names is the most honest record any of us have left. The road keeps teaching you small truths until you can recite them in your sleep. Water is politics, silence is a weapon, and mercy is a risky currency. I have learned them all in the worst classrooms, under ridgeline birds and beneath the hiss of a generator that thought it was done. Tonight, as I tuck the radio under its blanket and press my hand to the warm metal of the generator, those lessons feel less like weights and more like tools. I have no illusions that anything I do will fix the world. I only want to make one more thing less terrible for one more person. Hope, I have discovered, is not a single bright horizon. It is the slow, stubborn accumulation of tiny acts. The verdant was not a cure, only a pocket of mercy we could carry out for a night. The caravan moved north with barrels and grief. The quiet hand learned a new rhythm. The birds kept their silhouettes like punctuation marks in a sentence I have not yet finished writing. But in the hollow that night, children whose eyes had known only drought slept with round cheeks and steady breath. That is a fragment of hope, small, portable, and urgent. It matters. I have traded a voice for water, and that trade sits in me like a ledger that will never balance. Still, I do not regret it. There are things a voice can do, and things a body must do. Sometimes you have to choose one. What I regret is less a choice than the cost. The boy we buried. The nights I could not sing names into the static because my hands were full of mud and pump grease. Those things live in me in the way a scar does. Proof of damage and, oddly, proof of survival. So where does that leave me? Tired, yes. Bruised in ways both flesh and conscience recognize, but not quiet. I have taught 2 people to run a band. I have shown a woman how to splice a wire, and a boy how to set a dew trap. The radio sits for now, in other hands sometimes, and I sleep a little easier knowing the frequency can sing even if my battery dies. That is how you build a future in pieces. You hand someone else a tool and you teach them to keep it from breaking. The environment keeps its own calendar. Dust scours the edges of the verdant again. Winds regroove the riverbeds into new maps. The canopy will not return overnight. Some plants will not wake. That knowledge is a kind of sorrow you carry like a map. Useful, careful, often unbearably precise. But even maps have legends that say, sometimes roots find a way, sometimes a spring reasserts itself. We live for those sometimes. I have tried to be practical in my final lessons on air when I can. How to make a charcoal filter, how to check a generator's oil level, how to barter without selling your dignity. I have tried to teach codes and knocks and how to tell the difference between a band of raiders and a ragged family with a dog. None of these are poetic. They are not meant to be. They are survival. And when survival is your art, then the art becomes the thing you pass along. There are choices I won't make again, habits I will break if I can. I will not be reckless with the band. I will not stay so long in one place that the quiet becomes a target. I will not hoard skills. I will tell names until my throat is raw, and I will teach others to do the same. I will make sure the ledger is shared, because a ledger kept by one hand is an invitation for error. If there is a plea I want to leave with anyone who might be listening, someone with tired eyes and hands that know how to mend, here it is. Keep each other's names. Speak them at dusk like a roll call of the living. Teach someone to tune a frequency before you teach them to aim a rifle. Protect water as you would protect a child, and protect voices as you would protect a map. Do not confuse the necessity of survival with the surrender of humanity. You may have to do things you never imagined. That does not mean you must become someone you would have feared yesterday. We are not the same people we were before all this. Grief has reshaped us. Pragmatism has reshaped us. There are days I do not recognize my own hands in the morning light. There are nights when I hear my wife's laugh in a memory so bright it hurts. Those memories are blinding and precious. I keep them, not because they heal everything, but because they remind me what was possible, and therefore what might be possible again, in smaller, stranger forms. I do not promise safety, I cannot. The quiet hand will learn new cruelties. Storms will arrive uninvited. The birds will still perch and watch. But I can promise this. I will keep teaching, and I will keep choosing the small mercies when they are available. I will keep the ledger open and hand someone else the pen when my hand can no longer write. I will pedal the generator as long as my knees allow and show those who follow how to mend a broken dial or splice a worn coax. I will read names into the static because names are the smallest civilizations we have left. If you are out there and you hear this, if the static cracks and a voice cuts through the hiss, know this: I am not the only one. There are others who have chosen, like I have, to make small repairs to a world that has been ripped at the seams. Find each other, trade carefully, teach generously. When you can, take a day to plant something, even if it seems absurd. Planting is a vote cast in the future tense. Tonight, I will set the radio to a low watch, tuck the generator under a blanket, and sleep with one eye toward the horizon. Dawn will come whether we are ready or not. I will wake, and I will check the water, and I will call a few names, old friends and new. I will listen for Ray's laugh or a distant knock that says someone needs help. I will do this not because I believe the world will be fixed by a single voice, but because each voice is a stitch, and stitches held together can become seams, and seams can become shelter. So keep breathing, keep mending, keep naming. The world we knew is gone. The world we make will be different. It will be smaller in some ways and kinder in others if we choose it. Stay alive, stay human. And if you can, when you find a bowl of clear water, drink it and remember the sound of a small hand. My hand, maybe, or yours. pressing a radio into another's fingers and saying, "Teach them, don't let the silence win."